My parents uninvited my son from Christmas dinner to appease my sister's wealthy new fiancé, claiming he was too disruptive. I was devastated until a pocket dial voicemail revealed the real reason. They weren't just excluding us. They were secretly signing over the lake house I had spent 5 years restoring to my sister. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The silence in the living room was heavy, the kind that presses against your eardrums and makes the air feel thin. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the suffocating quiet of a Christmas morning that had been violently stripped of its joy. 10 minutes ago, the house had been vibrating with energy. My 8-year-old son, Leo, had been bouncing on the balls of his feet, his dress shoes clacking against the hardwood floor, a lopsided Santa hat pulled down over his eyes. He had been clutching a wrapped gift for his grandfather, a model car he had glued together himself, practically vibrating with the anticipation of showing it off. I had been in the kitchen, frantically trying to wrap a foil cover over the cranberry tart my mother, Susan, had specifically requested, checking my reflection in the microwave door to make sure my hair was still pinned perfectly in place. We were ready. We were happy. Then the phone rang. I stared at the device now as it sat on the coffee table, the screen black and lifeless. It felt like a bomb that had already detonated, leaving me standing in the wreckage while the dust settled around me. "Mom," Leo's voice was small, hesitant. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his Santa hat now held in his hand, the brim twisted nervously between his fingers. "Are we going to be late? Grandpa James hates it when we're late." I had to swallow 3 times before I could find my voice, and even then, it sounded like it was coming from someone else, someone hollowed out and brittle. "We aren't going, Leo." He blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "But, the presents and the tart, you made the tart." "I know, baby, I know." I walked over and knelt in front of him, my knees cracking loudly in the quiet room. I took his small, warm hands in mine. They were trembling slightly. "Grandma called, she said. She said there's been a change of plans. They aren't doing the big dinner anymore." It was a lie. A cowardly, pathetic lie to protect his heart, because the truth was a weapon I wasn't ready to wield against a child. The truth was Susan's voice, tight and breathless on the other end of the line. "Elizabeth, honey, listen, we've been thinking, with Natalia bringing Gale for the first time, well, you know how high-strung Gale can be about noise. He's not used to children like Leo." "Children like Leo," I had repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You mean children who are excited? He's 8, Mom. He has ADHD, he's not a criminal." "It's just that this dinner is very important for your sister," she had pressed, her tone shifting from apologetic to dismissive. "We need everything to be perfect. And frankly, Leo was very loud at Thanksgiving. We just think it might be better if you two stay home this year. We can do a separate brunch next week. Just the family." Just the family? The implications slammed into me like a physical blow. We weren't the family, not the important family anyway. Then my father, James, had picked up the extension. I hadn't even realized he was listening until his deep, gravelly voice cut through the line, devoid of any warmth. "Don't make this difficult, Elizabeth. Gale is a significant connection for us. We can't have the boy running around screaming while we're trying to discuss business. Just stay home. We'll send your gifts over later in the week." "Okay," I had whispered, mostly because I was in shock, my brain unable to process the cruelty of it. "Okay." I hung up. Now, looking at Leo's crushed expression, the anger began to rise. It started as a cold knot in my stomach and spread outward, heating my blood. They hadn't just rejected me, they had rejected him. They had looked at my sweet, energetic, loving boy and seen nothing but a liability, an inconvenience to be managed so they could impress a man they barely knew. I pulled Leo into a hug, burying my face in his hair so he wouldn't see the tears pricking my eyes. "How about we make pancakes?" I choked out, forcing a brightness I didn't feel. "Chocolate chip, and we can open our presents right now, just us." He nodded against my shoulder, but the bounce was gone from his step. The light had gone out of the morning. I didn't know it then, but the rejection was just the surface. The cruelty of that phone call was a mercy compared to the secret they were hiding. The betrayal was worse than the exclusion itself. It was a fundamental erasure of my existence in their lives. The hours that followed were a blur of forced cheerfulness that felt more exhausting than manual labor. I made the pancakes. I played the board games. I let Leo tear open every single gift, making a massive pile of wrapping paper in the center of the living room that I refused to clean up. I wanted the mess. I wanted the chaos. If my son was too disruptive, then I would embrace the disruption. But every time Leo laughed, there was a shadow behind it. He kept glancing at the door, as if expecting his grandfather to burst in and say it was all a mistake, that of course they were wanted. By noon, the house had settled into a lethargic rhythm. Leo was building a Lego set in his room, the sounds of snapping plastic drifting down the hall. I sat on the sofa, a cold cup of coffee in my hand, staring at the Christmas tree. The lights twinkled mockingly. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since 11:00 a.m. I hadn't looked at it. I assumed it was generic Merry Christmas texts from friends or distant relatives, messages I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to return. I didn't want to explain why I was home alone with my son. I didn't want to type out, "Oh, just relaxing," when the reality was that I was sitting in a puddle of grief and fury. Finally, around 12:30 p.m., the buzzing stopped, replaced by the blinking notification light. I sighed and picked up the phone. 3 missed calls, all from Dad. A surge of adrenaline spiked through me. Had they changed their minds? Did they feel guilty? Was James calling to apologize, to say that Christmas wasn't Christmas without us? For a split second, the little girl inside me who just wanted her father's approval flared to life. Then I saw the icon for a voicemail. I pressed play, lifting the phone to my ear, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Elizabeth," James's voice started, sounding impatient. "Pick up the phone. I need to know if you still have that spare key to the cabin in your safe. I can't find the master set and we need to." There was a fumbling sound, a loud rustle of fabric, like the phone being shoved into a pocket. He hadn't hung up. My breath hitched. I should have hung up, I should have deleted it. But I didn't. I sat there, frozen, listening to the muffled sounds of my parents' house, a house I was currently banned from. For the first 30 seconds, it was just ambient noise. The clinking of silverware on china, the sound of jazz music playing softly in the background. Then, Susan's voice cut through, distant but audible. I'm worried she's going to drive up there to check on the pipes like she usually does in January, if she sees the trucks. "She won't," James's voice replied, much louder now, closer to the pocket. "She's not going anywhere. I told you I shut that down. She's too sensitive to show her face after I told her not to come today." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. Shut that down. He was proud of it. He was proud of manipulating me into staying away. "I just feel bad," Susan murmured, though she didn't sound bad. She sounded anxious. "She put so much work into that place, James, the landscaping alone. She spent that entire summer laying the stone patio by hand." "Labor is cheap, Susan," James scoffed. "Vision is expensive, and Gail has vision. Elizabeth was just patching up a rotting corpse of a house. Gail and Natalia are going to build something real, something that reflects this family's actual status." I stopped breathing, the world tilted on its axis. "When do they sign?" Susan asked. "The notary is coming at 2:00 p.m. right before dinner," James said. "That's why I needed her key. I don't want any loose ends. Once the deed is transferred to Natalia's trust, it's done. We can tell Elizabeth in the spring. Tell her we sold it to pay for retirement or something. She'll get over it." And the demolition. First week of February, Gail wants the lot cleared before the thaw. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I lowered the phone slowly, setting it on my lap. The silence in the room was no longer heavy, it was electric. It was the silence of a fuse burning down. They hadn't uninvited us because Leo was disruptive. They hadn't uninvited us because of Gail's sensitivity to noise. They had uninvited me because they were stealing my inheritance. They were signing over the lake cabin, the property I had single-handedly saved from condemnation, the place I had poured 5 years of sweat and my entire savings into, to my sister and her fiancé. And they were doing it today, on Christmas, while I sat at home eating pancakes. She'll get over it. James had miscalculated. He had forgotten one crucial thing. I wasn't just the daughter who laid the patio stones. I was the law. ND-scape architect who pulled the permits, and I knew exactly where the property lines were buried. To understand the magnitude of this theft, you have to understand the cabin. It wasn't a mansion. When my grandfather left it to the family trust 10 years ago, it was a disaster. The roof was caving in, the foundation was cracking, and the garden was a jungle of poison ivy and dead oak trees. James wanted to sell it for scraps back then. He called it a money pit. Susan didn't care. She hated the outdoors anyway, preferring the sterile, air-conditioned comfort of her suburban colonial. But I saw what it could be. I was 26 then, just starting my firm. I made them a deal. I would manage the renovation. I would use my own money for materials, my own crew for the heavy lifting, and my own hands for the landscaping. In exchange, James promised, verbally over a handshake that I thought meant something, that the cabin would eventually be mine. He said, "You fix it, you keep it, kiddo, it'll be your legacy." For 5 years, that cabin was my life. I spent every weekend there. I didn't just hire people, I was in the trenches. I installed the French drains myself to stop the flooding. I designed and planted a terraced rain garden that was featured in a regional trade magazine. I restored the original cedar siding. I built the stone patio stone by heavy stone, blistering my hands until they bled, imagining the memories Leo would make there. And he did. Leo learned to walk on that grass. He caught his first fish off the dock I rebuilt. That cabin was the only stability we had after his father left. It was our sanctuary. My sister, Natalia, had visited exactly twice. Both times, she complained about the mosquitoes, the lack of cell service, and the smell of pine. She called it quaint with a sneer that suggested she found it pathetic. Natalia was the golden child. She was 2 years younger, beautiful, and fundamentally allergic to effort. She drifted through life on a cloud of our parents' adoration, moving from expensive hobby to expensive hobby, never finishing anything, never working a real day in her life. James and Susan enabled her every whim, convinced that her delicate nature required constant shielding from the harsh realities of the world. And then she met Gail. Gail was the endgame. He was a venture capitalist, or a tech incubator, or whatever vague, high-income title he was using this month. He drove a car that cost more than my education and wore suits that looked like they were woven from spun gold. He was everything James wished he was and everything Susan wanted to show off at the country club. From the moment Gail entered the picture 6 months ago, the dynamic shifted. James stopped asking about my business. Susan stopped asking about Leo's school. Every conversation revolved around Gail. Gail's investments, Gail's penthouse, Gail's opinion on wine. They were intoxicated by his wealth, desperate to lock him into the family. They treated him like a fragile artifact that needed to be preserved at all costs. I had met Gail once. He had looked me up and down, smirked at my work boots, and asked if playing in the dirt paid the bills. He had the cold, dead eyes of a shark. Now it all made sense. The disruptive comment wasn't about Leo. It was about keeping the victim away from the crime scene. They were giving Natalia and Gail the cabin as a wedding gift, a multi-million-dollar asset, thanks to my work, handed over for free. And worse, they were going to tear it down. Gail wants the lot cleared. They were going to bulldoze the rain garden, crush the patio, Erase 5 years of my life to build some glass and steel monstrosity that would stroke Gail's ego. I stood up, the phone still in my hand. My sadness was gone, vaporized by the heat of my rage. James thought I was weak. He thought I was the obedient, sensitive daughter who would cry in her pillow and accept whatever scraps they threw her way. He thought that by uninviting me, he had silenced me. He didn't know that in my home office, in a fireproof safe, I had the original receipts for every nail, board, and stone. He didn't know I had the emails from 5 years ago where he authorized the work. And he certainly didn't know that the notary he mentioned, the one coming at 2:00 p.m., was a woman named Brenda. Brenda, who had been my client 3 years ago. Brenda, whose backyard I had transformed into a paradise for her autistic daughter. Brenda, who sent me a Christmas card every single year. I looked at the clock, 12:45 p.m. I wiped my face. I walked into the kitchen and poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. "Leo," I called out, my voice steady, calm, and dangerous. "Yes, Mom." "Put your shoes on," I said. "We're going for a drive." "To Grandpa's?" he asked, hope flaring in his voice. "No," I said, grabbing my keys and the folder from my safe. "We're going to stop a robbery." I didn't speed. That was first instinct, to slam my foot on the accelerator and tear down the highway until I reached my parents' driveway, but I forced myself to drive exactly at the speed limit. Recklessness was a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed to be cold. I needed to be precise. "Mom, are you okay?" Leo asked from the backseat. His voice was small, cutting through the aggressive hum of the tires on the pavement. "You're gripping the wheel really hard." I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He looked so small in his puffy winter coat, clutching his new Lego set like a shield. "I'm okay, Bug," I lied, softening my grip until the blood returned to my knuckles. "I just remembered something important I need to tell Grandpa. It's a work thing." "Is he going to be mad?" "He might be," I said, my eyes narrowing as I focused on the road ahead. "But sometimes people get mad when they get caught doing something wrong." Leo fell silent, accepting this logic, and I turned my attention to the phone mounted on my dashboard. It was 1:15 p.m. Brenda, the notary, was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. I had 45 minutes to turn a chaotic emotional reaction into a legal blockade. I hit the speed dial for my lawyer, Sarah. It went to voicemail. It was Christmas, of course. I didn't leave a message. I didn't need advice. I needed leverage. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Brenda Notary. My finger hovered over the call button. This was a gamble. Brenda was a professional. If I called her and sounded like a hysterical, estranged daughter, she would hang up and do her job. I had to approach this as a contractor protecting an asset. I pressed call. "Merry Christmas, this is Brenda," she answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful. "Brenda, hi, it's Elizabeth Vance. I did the sensory garden for your daughter a few years back." "Elizabeth, oh my goodness, Merry Christmas. How are you? We were just talking about you the other day. The witch hazel is blooming beautifully." "I'm so glad to hear that," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Listen, Brenda, I know this is highly irregular, but I understand you have an appointment with my father, James Vance, at 2:00 p.m. today." There was a pause. The professional wall went up instantly. "Elizabeth, you know I can't discuss client schedules or details. That's confidential." "I know," I cut in, rushing to get the words out before she shut me down. "I'm not asking for details. I'm giving you a formal notice. I am currently in a legal dispute regarding the property at 44 Lakeview Drive. I have invested substantial capital and labor into that property under a verbal contract of ownership. If a transfer of deed takes place today, it will be fraudulent conveyance to avoid a debt." Silence, the kind of silence that costs money. "Elizabeth," Brenda said slowly, her tone no longer cheerful. "Are you telling me there is a lien on the property?" I'm telling you that I have the paperwork to file a lease pendens the moment the courts open tomorrow, I said, channeling every ounce of professional authority I had. And if you notarize that title transfer knowing that there is an active dispute regarding the asset's ownership, you could be deposed in the lawsuit that follows. It was a bluff, mostly. I hadn't filed the lease pendens yet. But in my state, the sweat equity and the verbal contract gave me a massive claim, one that would tie the title up in litigation for years. Title insurance companies hate litigation. Notaries hate being deposed. I see, Brenda said. I could hear the rustle of paper in the background. I am currently 5 minutes away from your parents' house. I cannot simply skip the appointment without cause. Don't skip it, I said. Just be thorough. Ask for the full history of the property improvements. Ask if there are any outstanding claims. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Just don't let ink hit paper until I walk through that door. I'm obligated to verify all parties are in agreement, Brenda said carefully, giving me the opening I needed. If you are present and contesting the validity of the grantor's right to transfer free and clear, well, I would have to pause the proceedings. I'll see you in 10, I said. I hung up, my hands shaking. I had bought myself a window. As I turned onto the familiar winding road of my parents' wealthy subdivision, the nostalgia that usually hit me was replaced by nausea. I passed the park, where I learned to ride a bike. I passed the bakery, where we used to get Sunday donuts. Every corner was haunted by the version of this family that had existed before money and status had rotted it from the inside out. I pulled into the driveway. It was packed. My father's pristine Lincoln was there, my mother's Lexus, and right in the center, taking up 2 spots like a metallic beast, was a sleek black Aston Martin. Gale. The house itself looked like a postcard. Wreaths in every window, white lights dripping from the gutters, a blow-up snowman waving cheerfully on the lawn. It was the perfect image of an upper-crust American Christmas. It was a stage set. Leo, I said, turning off the engine. Plan B. iPad, he asked, already reaching for it. iPad and headphones, you stay in the car, lock the doors. Do not open them for Grandpa, do not open them for Grandma, only for me. Understand. Is it dangerous? He asked, his eyes wide. No, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. It's just going to be loud, and I don't want you to hear grown-ups behaving badly. I checked my folder, receipts, emails, the printed photos of the cabin before and after. I took a deep breath of the cold winter air, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the front door. I didn't ring the bell. I still had my key. The front door opened with a heavy, oiled silence. The warmth of the house hit me first, the smell of roasting rosemary, expensive cologne, and pine. I could hear them in the dining room. A marvelous interest rate considering the volatility. Gail's voice was smooth, oily. But the real value is in the land. That structure is an eyesore. Once we level it, the equity triples instantly. I just want to make sure the zoning permits won't be an issue for the new build, my father said. He sounded deferential. Subservient. It made my stomach turn. James, please, Gail chuckled. I had lunch with the zoning commissioner last week. He's very excited about the improvement to the neighborhood. I walked through the foyer, my boots leaving wet footprints on the marble. I didn't care. I rounded the corner into the dining room. The scene was almost comical in its formality. The heavy oak table was cleared of food. In the center lay a stack of crisp legal documents. My father sat at the head, a gold pen in his hand. My mother, Susan, stood behind him, clutching a glass of sherry. Natalia was seated next to Gail, looking bored and scrolling on her phone. And there, at the end of the table, sat Brenda. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening slightly behind her glasses. She didn't smile. She set her notary stamp down with a deliberate clack. "Hello, Dad," I said. The room froze. James dropped the pen. It clattered onto the table, rolling toward the deed. His face went from shock to a deep, mottled red in the span of a second. Elizabeth, Susan gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. What? What are you doing here? I uninvited you, James snarled, standing up. He looked massive in his cashmere sweater, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in his shadow. I told you explicitly not to come. Get out, now. I think we skipped a step, I said, walking calmly to the table. I ignored the empty chair and stood directly opposite him. Usually, when you rob someone, you make sure they aren't watching. Rob, Natalia scoffed, finally looking up from her phone. Oh my God, Liz, don't be dramatic. We're having a business meeting. Go wait in the kitchen if you're going to crash. Who is this? Gale asked, leaning back in his chair. He looked at me like I was a waitress who had brought the wrong order. Is this the sister, the gardener? I'm the reason that property is worth anything at all, I said, locking eyes with him. And I'm the reason you aren't signing those papers today. James moved around the table, his finger pointed at my face. You are embarrassing yourself. You are embarrassing this family in front of guests. Leave, Elizabeth, or I will call the police. Call them, I challenged, slamming my folder onto the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Let's get a police report on file. It'll help my case. What case? Susan asked, her voice trembling. Liz, honey, please, you're upsetting your father. I'm upsetting him? I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. Mom, you called me this morning and told me my son was too disruptive to eat dinner. You let me believe I was a bad mother raising a bad child. But that wasn't it, was it? I looked at Brenda. Brenda, has my father disclosed that the property in question is subject to a constructive trust based on a verbal contract made 5 years ago? Brenda cleared her throat. Mr. Vance, your daughter claims she has a financial interest in the property. As I mentioned before she arrived, if there is a dispute. There is no dispute, James shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I own the deed. My name is on the title. I can give it to whoever the hell I want. And you promised it to me, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. 5 years, Dad, 5 years of weekends, my savings account, my labor. You stood on that deck, the deck I built, and shook my hand. You said, fix it, and it's your legacy. Was that a lie, or did you just decide my legacy wasn't expensive enough for your new friends? It was a hobby, James yelled. You were playing house, you think planting so. Me Hydrangeas buys you a $500,000 lakefront property. You're delusional. Hydrangeas? I opened the folder. I pulled out the first document, a receipt from the lumber yard. $30,000 in structural lumber, paid by Elizabeth Vance. I pulled out another. $12,000 for the new septic system, paid by Elizabeth Vance. I fanned them out across the table, covering the deed. Roofing, electrical, HVAC, the French drains, the foundation repair. I didn't plant flowers, Dad. I rebuilt the house you let rot. That's called unjust enrichment. And in this state, if I can prove I improved the asset under the promise of ownership, I have an equitable lien. You can't transfer this title until you pay me back. Every single cent. The silence that followed was absolute. Gale picked up one of the receipts. He glanced at it, then flicked it back onto the table like it was contaminated. How much? Gale asked. He didn't look at me, he looked at James. What's the number to make her go away? This is tedious. We don't owe her a dime, James spat. I don't want your money, I said, turning to my mother. She looked pale, her eyes darting between James and the receipts. I want you to look at me, Mom. You knew he was doing this. I heard the voicemail. Susan flinched. What voicemail? Dad didn't hang up, I said. I heard everything. Labor is cheap. She'll get over it. Tell her we sold it for retirement. I heard you planning to lie to me until spring. I heard you agreeing to let them bulldoze it. I pointed at the window, toward the driveway. My son is in the car. You excluded your grandson from Christmas not because he's loud, but because you were too cowardly to look me in the eye while you stole from me. We're doing this for Natalia, Susan cried out, tears finally spilling over. She needs security, Elizabeth. You have your career, you're independent, Natalia needs. She needs help. Security, I gestured to Gale, who was checking his watch. He drives a car worth more than my house. Why does he need my cabin? Because it's prime real estate, James shouted. And I'm not going to let it sit there being a rustic little shack for you to vacation in once a month. Gale has a vision. He's going to develop it. It's business, Elizabeth, grow up. Business, I repeated. Okay, let's talk business. Gale sighed loudly. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a checkbook. The leather looked soft, expensive. Look, Elizabeth, is it? He uncapped a fountain pen. I really don't have time for a domestic dispute. I have contractors scheduled for a site walk on Tuesday. Clearly, you feel undervalued, so here. He scribbled quickly and tore the check out. He slid it across the table. It stopped next to my hand. $5,000, Gale said, flashing a blinding, hollow smile. Cover your, what was it? Lumber, buy the kid a PlayStation, go home, let the adults finish their dinner. I looked down at the check. $5,000. It was an insult so profound it almost felt physical. It wouldn't even cover the windows I had installed last year. You think this is about money? I asked quietly. Everything is about money, Gale said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. Brenda, can we proceed? This is getting boring. Actually, Brenda said, her voice tight. I cannot proceed. Not with these receipts on the table and a verbal claim of ownership. Mr. Vance, I'm afraid I have to recuse myself until this is resolved legally. She began packing her bag. Sit down, James roared. He turned on me, his face purple. You spiteful little, you're ruining your sister's future, you're ruining this family. I'm saving it from a con artist, I said. Don't you dare speak about Gale that way, Natalia shrieked. She stood up, her face flushed. He's a genius. He's going to build a legacy for us. You're just jealous because you're a single mom living in a townhouse and I'm going to be rich. Natalia, look at the papers, I said. What? She blinked. The deed, I said, pointing to the document Brenda had left on the table. I saw it when I walked in. I've been staring at it for 5 minutes. I reached out and spun the document around so it faced Natalia. Read the grantee line, I commanded. It says Gaelic Holdings, LLC, Natalia read, confused. Yeah, so. You said it was for us, I said to her. You said it was a wedding gift for you and Gale. It is, Natalia looked at Gale. It's just a trust, right, babe? Like a family trust. Gale's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. It's a holding company, Nat, for liability purposes. It's standard practice in development. You don't put assets in personal names. You know that. I know that, I interrupted. But usually a family trust includes the family. I did a quick search on the way over. My lawyer has access to the state registry. Gaelic Holdings, LLC, was incorporated yesterday in Delaware. I looked at my father. Dad, did you check the operating agreement for this LLC? Do you know who the sole member is? James hesitated. Gale handles the finances. It's for Natalia's benefit. It's a single-member LLC, I said. Sole ownership. Gale, if you sign this deed, the property doesn't go to Natalia. It doesn't go to the couple. It goes 100% to him. If he dumps her next week, he keeps the land and she gets nothing. The room went deadly silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Natalia looked at Gale. Babe, is that true? Gale rolled his eyes. Oh, for God's sake. It's a tax structure, Natalia. Don't let her confuse you. She's trying to sabotage us because she's miserable. Are you going to listen to your failed architect sister or the man who is going to give you the world? He's right, James said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. He was staring at the LLC name. Elizabeth doesn't understand high finance. She plants trees. I understand contracts, I said. And I understand that you are handing over $1 million asset to a man you've known for 6 months, completely cutting out your daughter who actually works, and giving your other daughter zero legal claim to it. I turned to Susan. She was trembling, clutching the edge of the table. Mom, I said softy, they're going to tear down the rain garden. the one we planted for Grandma. Remember, we put her ashes under the dogwood tree." Susan let out a sharp gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. The dogwood. "Gail wants the lot cleared," I reminded her, using James's own words from the voicemail. "Clear the lot. That means the trees go, the patio goes, Grandma's memorial goes. It all gets scraped into a dumpster so Gail can build a glass box." I didn't think," Susan whispered. She looked at James. "James, the dogwood tree, you said they would keep the landscaping." "It's just a tree, Susan," James snapped, but he was sweating now. He could feel the room turning. "It's not just a tree," I said. "It's our history. And you're selling it for a connection to a guy who can't even put his fiancée's name on a piece of paper." Gail stood up abruptly. The chair scraped loud and harsh against the floor. The boredom was gone. In its place was a cold, predatory anger. "This is ridiculous," he said, buttoning his jacket. "James, call me when you've handled your domestic staff. I'm not signing anything while she's breathing down my neck." He looked at me. "You think you're smart, but you're just noise. I'll get that land. And when I do, I'll personally drive the bulldozer." "No," I said, pulling my phone out. "You won't." I tapped the screen, because I just sent the voicemail to Natalia. A ping sounded from Natalia's phone on the table. "And," I added, looking at James, "I just sent the photos of the receipts and the pre-existing condition of the house to the zoning board commissioner. You know, the one you had lunch with? I CC'd him on an email asking about permit violations for demolition on a historic watershed." Gail froze. "You did what?" James whispered. "I declared war," I said. The notification on Natalia's phone seemed to echo in the room, a digital bell tolling for the death of her illusion. She stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the play button. "Don't listen to it, Nat," Gail said sharply. His smooth, confident facade cracked, revealing the panicked bully beneath. "She's manipulating you. It's probably edited." "It's from Dad's number," Natalia whispered. She looked up at James, her eyes wide and wet. Why would Elizabeth have a voicemail from Dad's number? She pressed play. James's voice, tinny but unmistakable, drifted from the speaker. "Labor is cheap, Susan. Vision is expensive. Gail and Natalia are going to build something real. We can tell Elizabeth in the spring. Tell her we sold it to pay for retirement. She'll get over it." The color drained from Natalia's face. She looked at our parents, not with the adoration she usually held for them, but with a dawn of horror. Then the recording continued. "Once the deed is transferred to Natalia's trust, it's done." "Wait," Natalia said, pausing the recording. She looked at the papers on the table, then at Gail. "Dad said Natalia's trust, but the paper says Gaelic Holdings. You told Dad it was my trust." Gail shifted his weight, his jaw tightening. "It's a figure of speech, Natalia. It's our future. The LLC is just the vehicle." "No," James said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. He was staring at the deed, really looking at it for the first time, past the dollar signs and the prestige. "Gail, you told me explicitly that Natalia was a 50% managing member. You said her name was in the operating agreement." "It is," Gail lied, but his eyes darted to the door. "It's in the addendum, which I don't have on me." "Show me," James demanded. He wasn't the subservient sycophant anymore. He was a father realizing he had been played. "Log into the portal. Show me her name on the filing." "I don't have time for this interrogation," Gail snapped. "I am offering you the deal of a lifetime, and you're nitpicking paperwork because your jealous daughter threw a tantrum." "Nitpicking?" I stepped forward. "He's asking for proof that his daughter isn't being swindled. Why is that hard, Gail, unless the proof doesn't exist?" Gail sneered at me. "You stay out of this. You're nobody. You're a glorified gardener." "And you," I said, my voice steady, "are a fraud." I turned to Natalia. "Nat, look at him. He's not angry because I'm wrong. He's angry because I caught him. He was going to take the land, build his spec house, sell it for profit, and leave you with nothing." Dad and Mom were willing to cut me out to give you this life, and he was going to steal it from you too. Natalia looked at Gail. She looked at the expensive suit, the manicured hands, the sneer that was currently directed at her sister. Then she looked at the deed. "Is my name on it?" she asked Gail softly. "Baby, it's complicated." "Is my name on it?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "No," Gail shouted back. "Because you're a liability, Natalia. You have no credit, no assets, and no business sense. I'm doing the work, I take the equity. That's how the world works." The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. It was the silence of a bridge burning. Natalia picked up the stack of documents. The deed, the transfer forms, the tax affidavits. "Hey," Gail reached for them, "put that down." Natalia looked him dead in the eye. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she ripped the deed in half, then in quarters. She dropped the confetti of paper onto the table. "Get out," she whispered. "Excuse me," Gail laughed, incredulous. "Get out," James roared, stepping forward. He grabbed Gail by the arm of his $3,000 suit and shoved him toward the door. "Get out of my house before I kill you." "You're making a mistake," Gail yelled, stumbling back but trying to maintain his dignity. "You're throwing away millions. You're nothing without me." "We're a family," Susan cried out, finding her voice at last. "And you're done here." James didn't stop shoving until Gail was out on the front porch. He slammed the heavy oak door and locked it. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was the most beautiful thing I had heard all day. The dining room was quiet. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a shaky, exhausted vacuum in its wake. I stood there, feeling the weight of the last 5 years, the sweat, the hope, the betrayal, hanging in the air. James walked back into the room. He looked older. The bluster was gone. He looked at the torn papers on the table, then at Natalia, who was sobbing into her hands. Susan was hugging her, rocking her back and forth. Then he looked at me. "Elizabeth," he started, his voice cracking. "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. "Just don't." I picked up my folder. "I saved you from him. I saved Natalia. But don't think for a second that fixes what you did to me. You were ready to erase me. You were ready to let him destroy Grandma's tree. You chose money over your daughter. Twice." "Liz, please," Susan wept. We were blinded. We wanted the best for Natalia." "You wanted status," I corrected, "and you were willing to sacrifice me to get it." I walked to the door. "I'm leaving. I have a son waiting in the car, a son you didn't want to see today." "Wait," James said. He rushed to a desk in the corner of the room, fumbling through a drawer. He pulled out a heavy iron key, the master key to the cabin. He walked over and held it out to me. His hand was shaking. "Take it," he said. "It's yours, the deed. I'll have Sarah draw it up next week. A direct transfer to you, no trust, no conditions. It's yours, Elizabeth, it always should have been." I looked at the key. It was cold and heavy in my palm. It was what I had wanted for 5 years, but the victory felt hollow. "I'll take it," I said, closing my fist around it. "Because I earned it. Because I built that place. But if you think this key buys you forgiveness, you're wrong. You have to earn that. And it's going to take a lot longer than 5 years." I turned and walked out. When I got back to the car, Leo was watching a movie on his iPad. He looked up, his eyes bright. "Did you stop the robbery?" he asked. I looked back at the house. I saw the silhouette of my father standing in the window, watching us leave. "Yeah, buddy," I said, putting the car in gear. "I stopped the robbery." "Does that mean Grandpa isn't mad anymore?" I reached back and squeezed his knee. "It means Grandpa has a lot of thinking to do, but you know what? We have the cabin, the real cabin. And this summer, we're going to build that treehouse we talked about." "Really?" Leo cheered. "Hooray." "Ally," I smiled, and for the first time that day, it was genuine. We didn't go back for dinner. We went to a 24-hour diner on the highway. We ate waffles and bacon for Christmas dinner, laughing until our sides hurt. It wasn't the perfect, high-society Christmas my parents had wanted. It was messy and loud and real. And it was ours. Weeks later, the deed arrived in the mail. It was signed, notarized, and recorded. The cabin was officially mine. I heard through the grapevine that Gail had tried to sue James for breach of contract, but it turned out his LLC was just a shell with no assets, so no lawyer would take the case. He vanished back into the city, looking for the next family to leech off of. Natalia is in therapy. We text sometimes. She's learning that being the golden child isn't a prize, it's a cage. She's starting to understand that effort is the only thing that gives value to life. As for my parents, we're low contact. They visit Leo sometimes, but always on my terms. They look at the cabin now with a strange mix of shame and respect. They see the rain garden, the patio, the dogwood tree, and they know that they almost destroyed the only real legacy they had. They know they almost lost me. And every time they look at that deed, they are reminded that some things can't be bought and some loyalty can't be sold. It was a hard lesson, but at least they finally learned it.